The next graph we're going to talk about is the bar graph, or you may know it as a bar chart. Notice each bar represents a different category here. We put the categories on the x-axis, and we put our frequencies on the y-axis. This right here is a frequency bar graph, but we can also make a relative frequency bar graph based off the percentages. And if we were to do that, the shape of this graph would not change, but the y-axis scale would change to percentages. So generally speaking, what we're going to make are what we call Pareto charts. In a Pareto chart, do you notice how that the largest category always starts first, and the next largest, then the next, and it decreases in order all the way down to the smallest? It's still a bar chart. We're just ordering it by putting the largest variable first. We're going to use our bar charts for comparative purposes. And notice here you have data that represents the educational attainment in 1990 and 2013 of adults 25 years and older who are residents of the United States. The data presented as relative frequency. The 1990 sample has 158,870 people, while the 2013 sample has 206,899 people. Now, the question becomes this. First off, why are we putting this into relative frequency? Why not use a frequency graph from this? And the answer is because if you notice here, these graphs don't have the same amount of people. If they did have the same amount of people, we could compare these two graphs based off their frequency. But because they're different, what you're going to notice is that simply because this graph right here has more people in it, every category will have a higher frequency in it than the other graph. So our comparisons will be off there. So what we do is we bring it back to the same scale, and we do that by finding the relative frequency. And we can make a bar graph from this based off its frequency if we wanted to. How would you find the frequency from this graph? Well, we could take each one of the relative frequencies. For instance, in 1990, you had 25% of the people were not a high school graduate. How many people is that? Well, you could simply do 0.25 times the total of people there are, which is 158,870. And that gives us 39,717.5, but you can't have a 0.5 person. This is probably going to be 39,718 people in that particular group. And we could do that for each graph to find the frequency if we wanted to, but we're going to use this relative frequency to actually do more. We're going to compare with this. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a comparative bar chart from this, or a side-by-side bar chart is what we call it. And to do that, we're going to create one axis. And on this axis, we'll have the relative frequency here. And notice on the x-axis will be our categories. So we'll start off by, we can denote this by actually making, let's make 1990 red bars and 2013 blue bars. So for each category, we'll scale our axis, and our largest value here is going to be, it looks like 30%. So we'll scale it like this. This right here is 5%. 15, 0.2, 0.25, 0.30. We'll go up here one more, 0.35. So for our first category, we have not a high school grad. And we'll label that axis like this. We'll put not a high school grad down here. We'll call it NS or NG. And for this, we have 25% for 1990 and 12% for 2013. And notice why it's called a side-by-side bar chart. You're stacking your bars side by side of each other. And this makes for easy comparison. Here you can see that there were more non-high school graduates in 1990 than there were in 2013. Next one is the high school grad category. And again, here we have 30%, again 30%. Then you have your some college. Here you have 19%. This one is 17%. Now, I'm not going to write all these out, but you can see that as you keep moving, these bars are changing heights, or they're either the same. And what this is going to help us establish eventually, when we start to talk more about statistics, is the notion of independence. And independence means that one thing does not affect another. In this case, we can see that in this first one, not graduating in the year that it happened, is not independent of each other, because we can tell that here there's a greater chance you're going to have not a high school graduate in 1990 versus in 2013. So that means the year does make a difference. But if you move to this next category of high school graduates, notice that they're exactly the same. And what that tells me is that it doesn't matter whether you graduated in 1990 or if you graduated in 2013, their graduation rate was the same. That also goes for about some college. But if you keep moving, you'll notice that throughout this entire thing, these are getting smaller as you move up in 1990, and these are getting larger. So what does that say? In general, this says that as the years have started to increase, as our years are moving towards 2013, what happens to our graduation and our different higher levels of education rates? Well, they're starting to increase. So keep that in mind when you look at these graphs. It's what a comparative graph is doing. And it's called a side-by-side because you can actually see the bar chart stacked side by side.